Hey everyone, good afternoon. Great pleasure to be here. Jeff and everyone else involved in putting together this event, I really appreciate it. So I'm gonna, Jeff, how long do I have? I should have checked your schedule.
You can take 40 minutes.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, so here's the plan, guys. I will talk for about half an hour, and then I'll show just kind of a quick slideshow. I know that's an antiquated term, but just some pictures. Because I'm a Marine, not because I'm a Marine, but each one has kind of a point and a story to it. So I'm gonna kick off by talking about the war itself, and just by way of expectation, I understand that I'm in the think tank capital of the world here, and there are nothing that I've read by anyone over the last 3 weeks sounds at all ambivalent. There's either Ukraine's in trouble or Ukraine is not in trouble. For my part, I see a worm's eye view of what's going on, but I've been there long enough to kind of gather data points. And so what I've said, what I'm going to say doesn't make me, it's not like the carved on tablets or anything, but it's just my observations of kind of the bigger picture. So, first of all, I don't know if you guys have seen the news or if you're even interested, but good indication. Putin or the Duma, either yesterday or today, passed a law that is a step towards general mobilization of Russian males between 18 and 64, with harsh penalties for those who do not sign up. All Russian males now between those ages can't leave the country. You may say, Andy, why is that good news? Well, of course, it shows that what a lot of Western analysts have realized for a long time, Russia is facing a manpower shortage. And they're also running low on equipment. Okay, none of this is news. And it would appear ostensibly Ukraine has the edge in both those areas. How many of you have been to Ukraine recently? Okay, a couple. It's Kiev, so I'm going to ask you, it's always dangerous to ask a question, right, when you haven't prepped the guy. Male, female population ratio, what was your impression, outside the front line? Did it look like a country at war generally? Yeah, aside from the air raids and the, all of that. My point is this, that there is no sense of general mobilization in Ukraine right now. It is widely accepted that a small percentage of the population is fighting the war. And actually, surprisingly, there's no resentment at that. When you talk to soldiers on the front, there's no resentment when they go to Kiev and, they see young men with man buns, not there's anything wrong with that, but, who look very unmilitary and are just continuing to enjoy life. Zelensky is, I don't know, I can't get inside his head, but it seems as though he's going to hold out for a while on kind of general conscription. There is already, as many of you know, a prohibition on Ukrainian males same age leaving the country, but there isn't really a sense that their backs are against the wall. And life goes on, and there's much to be admired about that, but there's also much to be concerned. All right, I'm going to, because Ukraine is facing a manpower shortage, and the manpower shortage doesn't come from its pool of manpower itself. It comes from the lack of regeneration process. All right, what that means is that the process for getting guys from the street into the military, trained, armed, equipped, is frankly broken. And just my observation. All right, and that's partly why we in the Mozart Group are in business there, if you can call it that. That's why we are swamped with requests from training mostly at the brigade level, by brigade commanders who realize to their horror, that's a strong word, but that 80% of their guys, 80–90%, show up in uniform, never having fired their weapons. And that is, that's from the census that we have done among our students over the course of the last 3 months. So something is wrong, obviously, in that process. There is also, not covered by Western media, a cracks in morale among frontline units, and they're almost imperceptible. Those of you again who've been to Ukraine will be astonished at just Putin has created a country, right? He's created a nation, and there's just supreme confidence and there's high morale. That is true, but among the guys who are day after day enduring, especially in Donbass, Russian artillery fire, airstrikes, there are certainly cracks in the seams, and we've seen those among the guys we're training. It's a natural order of things. Even the best soldiers in the world will eventually break under those conditions. This morning, a frontline brigade in Donbass, the soldiers of a brigade sent an open letter to Zelensky accusing their officers of mismanagement, in some cases cowardness and corruption, and saying they're short of everything, to medical supplies, equipment, weapons, ammunition. And that would be perhaps something you could dismiss if it was just a single unit, but this is one of their best brigades. So in fact, guys that we have worked with, and it's an extraordinary step. Those of you again who know Ukrainian culture, for within the military, for a group of soldiers to speak out in that way. So I'm not bringing doom and gloom. I'm just saying, be wary of these euphoric reports that you read, even in some very, very intelligent and very perceptive analysts, I think, are getting it wrong. Yeah.
I was just wanted to add the fellow we had on just before you from GUR.
Mm-hmm.
In private conversations with me, he would say, we are worried about the morale of soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers. And that sort of flew in the face of Western media. Yeah. Making it sound like, it's a party.
All the TikTok videos and everything. Drunkenness off the line among soldiers, alcohol's banned in Donbass. But anyone who's been there near the front line will observe that soldiers coming off the front line will invariably just get falling down drunk. Who can blame them? And these guys, don't get me wrong, they're salt of the earth. They're all volunteers. They are the most attentive and, in a sense, most likable soldiers. That includes, unfortunately, our own nationality, Marines aside, that I have trained in 30 years. So I'm a great supporter of the rank and file of the Ukrainian military. Their officers need some work, frankly, and this gets into, as we talk about and by that I mean not necessarily leadership skills, but knowing how to plan, how to integrate intelligence, how to integrate fire support. Okay, so how can I be saying these things when it appears as though Ukraine has just conducted a lightning offensive in the north, taking back 6,000 square miles of territory? And certainly that's not to be sneezed at, with just 3 brigades, all right? Again, though, here's some backside of the story. 3 brigades, but there's unlikely to be much left in the tank. I can't talk here about the size of the reserve and everything, but I can tell you that's not particularly large. And all observations that I've had, I was in Izium. Well, no, I wasn't in Izium, on the outskirts of Izium just 10 days ago, or whenever it was that the Ukrainian forces took the town. And those 3 brigades were already digging in around Kharkiv, preparing for a defense. So it does look as though that offensive has reached its culminating point. I hope that I am wrong. In the south, Kherson, I've read reports here that that was a very clever feint, to draw attention down south while the Ukrainians conducted a counteroffensive in the north. I think we would all love that to be true, but it was not. What's happening in the south is not a feint. It is a grinding counteroffensive war of attrition, both sides taking very heavy casualties. The hospitals in Zaporizhia, where I have a team now, to include medics, they are packed with Ukrainian soldiers. Of course, the same is happening on the Russian side. And yes, we all know that the Russians have 20,000 soldiers who may well be caught and cut off in a salient, but the Ukrainians are moving very, very slowly, and that's not a criticism. It's a movement all along the line, and there is still pretty stiff resistance. So it is not a Guderian-like breakthrough. either in the north or in the south. And in Donbass, where I just come from, the Russians continue to advance. It's literally inch by inch, and there's no finesse to it. It is grinding and it's brutal. You just have to follow on the map, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Solidor, and now Bakhmut, and maybe eventually Kramatorsk. You know, they'll form a pocket. They'll make that town a pocket, and they will just pummel the crap out of it with airstrikes and artillery. The civilian population that are left take to the cellars and live a primeval existence. It has to be seen to be believed, you know, cut off from food and running water. Many of them choose to stay simply because it's their homes and they don't feel confident they have anywhere else to go. And for the Ukrainian military caught in these pockets, you can only take so much of that. When you go in these towns, you can tell the defensive positions there are not intended to be defensive positions. They're more observation points. So, they're without fields of fire, without berms, all of these things. And that kind of tells us that the Ukrainians are almost reconciled where they realize that they can't put up a strong defense in these places once the Russians decide to take them. Now, I have no insights into what the general staff's thinking, but I would guess that, you know, from their point of view, hey, we're just going to make progress in the north, cut down through Lyman into Donetsk, and similarly in the south. Who knows? But it's going to be harder to make ground in areas beyond Kharkiv. In Kharkiv, the Russians did not have their best soldiers. Down in the south, they have, what do they call, the VDV? They're airborne troops. They're very good, and they're putting up a stiff resistance, and they are reinforcing Donetsk. I can't speak for Putin either, but the advances in Donbass are consistent, you know, with what he has said, that if he walks away without Donbass, then the war will appear to Russians, even Russians, to have been a failure. So although to, you know, ISW, or General Petraeus, who's written very well on this, it appears as though it's strategically unimportant. There's immense emotional value to both Russians and the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians, for their part, are determined to a man and woman that there should be no ceasefire and no negotiation while there are Russian boots on Ukrainian soil. And that is to include Crimea, is to include all of Donbass. I have yet to meet a Ukrainian who has said anything different. I have yet to meet anyone who has said, oh, you know what, we should negotiate and hope, you know, hope for the best. Just one other, you know, so you could say, Andy, well, who's going to win? I'm confident eventually Ukraine will win. I'm confident that they will, but it's a question of how hard and bloody a slog it's going to be. And I think the United States can help in that regard. Weapons are good. HIMARS was good, but frankly, they weren't provided in large enough quantities to make a huge amount of difference. A lot of the effect they've had has been on morale. It's been intangible, and the Russians have suffered tremendously from HIMARS targeting their ammo depots and things like that. However, ATACMS, all right, with a 300 kilometer range is what Ukrainians need, and they need long-range precision strike drones, and they need long-range surveillance drones, all of which they're very adept at using. US government policy, I do understand, is that giving these to the Ukrainians will enable them to strike into Russia, which is game-changing. However, Ukrainians are unlikely to slap their benefactor in the face if there's a proviso put on these things. But 300 kilometers will enable them to reach into Crimea and really mess with Russian rare areas. But in the end, as we all know, and I don't know, there's probably artillerymen in the audience who are going to say that I'm speaking blasphemy here, but it's infantry, right? It's infantry that takes ground. And as I mentioned, the Ukrainians, from a policy perspective, have to look at the regeneration progress in order to improve that. Okay, enough on kind of the bigger picture. That's just kind of my perspective. I do hope, some of our I know I've alienated people in the past by being a little too angry about what I thought was incoherent US foreign policy. So I'm not angry anymore. But I am, I still feel it's a little incoherent. You know, we're either in or we're out. We keep drawing these imaginary red lines that we think are really going to piss Putin off. Putin's already pissed off. You know, I mean, by providing ATACMS, providing MQ-1s, MQ-9s, we're not going to tilt the balance into World War III, I don't think. All right, don't call me on it if we do. Just my thought. So, all right, so the Mozart Group. I'm called the founder of the Mozart Group. That's true, I suppose, but it's also misleading. The Mozart Group kind of evolved to include the name. Back in early March, I showed up in Ukraine as a journalist, well, a very second-rate journalist for task and purpose, who were kind enough to take me on as a freelance. I wrote, my obligatory 4 or 5 articles, but then it seemed quite trivial to just be writing about the war. I had been in Ukraine previously, both as a Marine and then as a special operations officer, helping to train and educate units there, both Marine and special operations units. I was running into guys that I knew in the Ukrainian military who were saying, Andy, we really need help training. And this is as the Russians were closing in on Kiev. I think someday a movie will be made about, what happened there, because it was most extraordinary story. Some of you may remember reading that the Ukrainian government was handing out AK-47s on the street to anyone between the ages of 18, a magic 18 and 60. So I would have barely made it if I had been Ukrainian. On the top side, that is, Jeff. But these guys were getting in their personal vehicles, driving to Irpin or Bucha or the western suburbs and fighting the Russians. And so they were, enrolled in these Territorial Defense Force battalions that were literally stood up in days. And so there was a need to train these guys. And with a kind of a small ragtag group of, actually, I started off just former Marines, guys I knew from MARSOC who flew out post-haste, and we formed a training team. And we're training these guys. We had a 5-day training schedule. That's all we were allocated. The guys we were training days before had been students. They had been artists. We had a guy who played violin in the Kiev orchestra. They were not soldiers, but we had 5 days to get them ready. And it was a kind of a mass production. They were all very attentive because they knew what lay ahead of them after the 5 days. And the training areas, we had to keep moving around because we would start training in one area and the Russians would target it with artillery. And so we would have to keep moving. Remember, Kiev at the time, there were Russian drones overhead all the time. There were yahoos, call them fifth columnists or collaborators or whatever, who were running around the streets shooting at people. So it's quite an interesting time. A lot of the guys that we were training had already fought the Russians, as they came into their towns. And some, I remember some extraordinary stories. There was one guy who I'm still in contact with, who had been a medical student of all things. And he was pulled into the Territorial Defense Force. They formed into a platoon. He was sent off with a squad into the northern suburbs. And he'd never held a weapon before. And he was scaring everyone so much in his unit by the way he was handling his weapon. His platoon commander took it away from him, gave him a bag of grenades. And he told me, that was such a relief. They were so easy to use. It was this kind of upbeat black sense of humor that has sustained them throughout, but extraordinarily brave individuals. And none of that is exaggerated. Literally you'd see guys pile into their cars carrying anti-tank weapons and going off. Husband-wife teams, you name it. It was the defense of Kiev owes everything to untrained volunteers. It wasn't the Ukrainian military was occupied everywhere. And amazingly, they stopped the Russians in their tracks. There were other things. The Ukrainian artillery did a great job, and drones, the Bayraktar TB2, which, by the way, is a terrific platform, only $2 million a pop. You compare that to the MQ-1, MQ-9, which reached $30 million. right? We make all these high-end Gucci, sophisticated weapon systems, right, to keep to keep constituents happy. But the problem is then we can't pass them on to our partners in sufficient quantity to make a difference. But the Turks certainly, they. So we like about Erwan. He's emerged from this, playing both sides very well. Anyway, so that was the beginning of the Mozart Group. I don't remember who called it the Mozart Group. Someone came up with it, as a counter to the Wagner Group. I was ambivalent about the name. By then it had caught on because we're nothing like the Wagner Group. We don't carry weapons. We are not foreign fighters, despite what a recently article in the Atlantic called me a foreign fighter, and I canceled my subscription, which I'm sure didn't upset the editor tremendously. But it's very important for us that we remain on the right side of US foreign policy and that there's no ambivalence about that. So nothing that we do, and there's two things we do, actually three things. We train Ukrainian military, we evacuate civilians from areas under bombardment. And in that part of the pie is those areas that other non-government organizations will not go into, because there's a ton of, there's a welter of NGOs who provide assistance once refugees are taken to a secure place, like for instance, Dnipro or even Kramatorsk, but very few organizations that go into the towns that are being bombarded to take civilians out, but also, which is the second thing, provide humanitarian assistance, food, water, medicine. We have physicians assistant on our team. We've got trained medics. We've had a doctor at one point. So we're able to help them out. To my knowledge, we're the only organization that does that now in these places. But we do use. We are supplied with humanitarian assistance by the World Central Kitchen and other organizations who requested us to deliver it. And then the third thing we do, actually, that's it. No, yeah, evacuate civilians, humanitarian assistance, and training. By the way, when we ask populations, what do you need? It's things that perhaps we wouldn't think about. Hey, we need candles, tampons. I wouldn't have thought of that. They are literally without this. They're living in the dark in these places all day and night, hearing shells land above them. It's very poignant. It's hard to imagine until you see it. And they retain that sense of humor. They retain that compassion. Neighborhoods kind of they come together. Sometimes one set or another. Every time that we've gone to feed one group of people, we'll get a volunteer to show us where the next group is, to go through the streets, which are always hazardous. They keep track of time by just marking with chalk on the walls. Over three to 4 months, when we evacuate them, if they do agree to go, they always have animals they want to bring with them, and we've never said no. At times it's very, it can be obviously rewarding, but also very frustrating, because there is a feeling, even among the soldiers, that these guys are collaborators, they're fifth columnists, they are Russian speakers, they are, to a man and woman, the guys that we've taken out or spoken to are vehemently anti-Russian, and who would not be, after living in those conditions that period of time. But it does talk about a schism in Ukrainian society that I feel has to be resolved, after this war, if not during it. How am I doing on time, Jeff?
Good.
Okay.
Since you
you're asking me the questions I planted with you. Yeah. Okay.
Since you took a breath. So part of what I'm really interested in is you retired, I guess, recently, right?
2019, yeah.
2019. So then you were over there doing a job as a journalist, as you said, and then you saw a need, I guess, right? So then you just called some friends and said, hey, there's no money, but
yeah,
What, so how did that?
Yeah, it really did. So, yeah, so the no money piece was a bit of an obstacle for people explaining to their wives why they wanted to go back into a war zone. I think that it was a tremendous strength because we have, again, I was in the military 31 years. I was in some awesome units, both, Marine infantry and then special operations. I can tell you that the Mozart Group, the guys I have me around now, are undoubtedly the best that I've ever had, both in terms of proficiency and cohesion. We represent 12 different countries, and yet everyone gets along really well, tremendously courageous, very competent at what they do, and very good at reaching across the cultural divide to motivate Ukrainians. And I think all of that comes from the fact that their motivation, it's all a little bit different. We've got some younger guys who missed out on combat, and or that we're in countries, come from countries such as Ireland, whose military was never involved in wars. Lucky guys, who kind of, felt incomplete from their military careers. So there's a sense of adventure there. But a lot of our guys are veterans of Afghanistan and Iraq, both British and US. And I can't speak for everyone, but there's a sense of, especially following the fall of Afghanistan, all of us went through that trauma. Iraq still, it's still, I guess the jury's still out, but I think, most Iraqi veterans I've spoken to are very ambivalent about, the involvement there and what happened subsequently. And so here is an opportunity to serve for a cause that is absolutely morally unambivalent. I want to, add that for most of them, it's not particularly about Ukraine. It's about, much wider issue, right? And good versus evil, if you like. You don't want to break it down so simplistically, but that is true. There is nothing, I've heard it time and time again. There is nothing, there's no second thought about what we're doing at all, although we, have been accused of various things, even by Americans, of prolonging the war, from there to being mercenaries. But it's morally unambivalent, and I think that pleases people, and they like the sense of being able to do that. It gives them a sense of accomplishment and a sense of purpose, and they have the camaraderie that is, after all, what those of you in the military know, that's what sustains you. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. So let's say 10 minutes for you to.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Do we have pictures? If not, no.
Let me run next door.
No, you know what? Don't worry. I tell you what. Let's do. I'm sorry.
Oh, got some.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna. But I do want to leave time for questions. So is it 10 minutes just me?
Yeah, 10 minutes total.
Oh, 10 minutes total.
Right now, yeah. So we want to end at 3:20.
Okay. All right. Total.
12 minutes.
12 minutes. Okay. I want to turn over to questions then, rather than pontificate more. But I will say, while you're thinking of good questions, and Jeff, if no one asks questions, then go to number 3. Okay, I've got a good answer for you this time. Yeah, so this, when we're talking about evacuations, this is Lysychansk. It's now in Russian hands. Like this was 3 days before it fell, the governor of Lysychansk. You see, a lot of these places, there's only one like main highway in and out. Our vehicles are crap. They don't perform well off-road, so we're stuck at that highway. The Russians, of course, have all those roads dialed in with artillery, so it becomes, it becomes quite sketchy getting in and out. We have to do it quickly. And Lysychansk was one of the first places we went into. The governor declared the road unpassable because everything that went along that road was getting targeted. There can be no question from anyone who's been in Donbass about what the Russians target. They target everything that moves, along those roads, civilian vehicles. And as you drive along, you just see one wrecked vehicle after another. But our team went in with one other team, a French team, to take the last group of civilians out. as we came out, this was actually, we didn't realize at this time, there were actually Russian forces there. They'd moved, they'd almost closed that pocket, and they opened fire on us with 30mm cannon, which is mounted with BMP-2s. I mention that because those particular weapon systems, the Ukrainians don't have any BMP-2s left, but that particular weapon system has caused a tremendous amount of casualties. And indeed, there was a French journalist killed outside the Sichuans by 30mm rounds. So quite plain. Okay, sorry, just an anecdote. And now over to questions. Yeah. Yep. Okay.
Hey, what's your take on the durability of the will of the Ukrainian people to keep fighting? And if you could put that in context with the respective leadership of Ukraine and Russia, which one of them do you feel like ultimately, which one feels like they have more to lose by not seeing this all the way through? And how might that trickle down into the strategies on the ground?
Yeah, it's really it's difficult to compare as far as Putin, obviously his survival rests on him at least holding Donbass. Your question regarding the Ukrainian people, there's no doubt about it in my mind. Their confidence is sky high. Their determination to see it through is sky high. And for those of you being in Ukraine before the war, it's a different country now. There's a sense of unity and purpose that just didn't exist there before. Zelensky, of course, has become not just an international hero, but a national hero. It's very rare now. Sometimes people would take you aside and tell you, oh yeah, sometimes people would take you aside and tell you how pissed off they are that he didn't prepare for the war. And certainly, I'm not going to go into that, but yes, he's got a lot to answer for. Mariupol didn't need to fall the way it did. They already knew that was going to be a Russian target. They could have stockpiled it with food and water, and there were no established defenses outside that city. So there are strategic, from a policy perspective, he certainly made some mistakes, but no one, everyone is behind him now. They recognize he's iconic. He's an iconic figure, both within the country and internationally. So that's the Ukrainian side. I think the only hope, the only near-term hope, for a swift Russian, I don't want to say defeat, but the Russians becoming more malleable in negotiation processes, of course, Putin going, and I don't think that's beyond the imagination right now. Some of you may have read this morning, I think 18 provincial deputies signed a petition saying he was mismanaging the war. What's that Chechen leader's name? Karabakh, Radnan, Kadyrov. Yeah, even he has implicitly criticized Putin. And you'll see, the Russian military bloggers are starting to be more out in the open. Putin, for his part, retreated to Sochi after the breakthrough in Kharkiv. There is, again, I don't pretend to have God's eye view on this, but the Ukrainian military guys will tell you there is a growing rift between the FSB and the Russian military, not surprisingly, right? So this was an FSB war as far as the military is concerned, and the FSB messed it up with their improper, the bad intelligence, and yet the army, of course, has taken the brunt of the cost. So there is a growing resentment. I don't think it's beyond the realm of possible that there will be a coup or someone will take a shot at Putin. He won't simply be overthrown. They'll have to kill him, of course. But that's about the limit of my speculative expertise. From Putin's part, success in Donbass at least equals survival. I don't have insights into Russian mindset, but I do know from just reading, reports on the Ukrainian intelligence that whether we think it's logical or not, that's what the Russians are focused on, holding on to that. They would love to have that strip in the south too, the land bridge. They would love to take Odessa, but even if they hold on to Mariupol, that's to them a win. The north, it doesn't matter so much to them. I think, yeah.
Thanks for the work that you do. I'm curious, down on the ground, what does it look like in terms of Russian intelligence? Like, it seems to me like they would want to target groups like yours and humanitarian groups because of the big difference that you're making. And I'm curious what type of presence they have on the ground.
Yeah, it's really difficult to say. We talk about this a lot among ourselves, you know, and within the group, there's varying opinions of we're not that important to guys who are really, you know, do think we're being targeted. In answer to your question, yes, we have had various warnings from the SBU that they are targeting at us kinetically. But I would add that there's so many other things that they can target. We feel that you know, we're good for the time being. But it doesn't matter if they're targeting us or not. As I said, they target everything that moves along those roads. So you know, we don't underestimate the risk. And the risk calculus is one of the hardest things I have to do as a leader there. You know, because I'm still responsible for guys, even though everyone on the evacuation teams are volunteers. And it's still, you know, before we go in somewhere, I make sure that, you know, there's no harm or foul, those who want to stay outside and what we call the collection point, and those who want to go in. And a couple of times it's, you know, it's been, you know, my guys say, hey, boss, it's not, this is too risky, you know, and we make the call, especially during airstrikes or something like that. Yeah. Cleanup. Oh, what did I do?
In terms of what you've seen on the front lines, I've heard it's much more analog with like Motorola radios and Garmin Vortexes. Have you seen any civilian usage of phones, like with ATAC being open sourced and released?
They use a version of ATAC, and I forget the name. But for the most part, much of what they do is analog. If you look at, I mean, they're very good with drones and technical. But when you look at how they transmit coordinates at gun target line, it's all done with, you know, maps and guesstimation, a lot of it. Now, not at the highest echelons, drone command with a, but in units on the front line. Yeah, it's very much an analog war, which is curious because Ukrainians are incredibly technologically savvy people, and I think there's a sense of frustration about that. Yeah, radios. Most units do not have secure radios. They're still using, you know, walkie-talkies, and I think they get by because the Russians have proven to be surprisingly inept when it comes to electronic warfare. They're very good at jamming. We can't use our radios. If the Russians are within 3 or 4 kilometers, it's useless trying to talk to each other on our radios because they're pretty good at barrage jamming into these areas.
And even the Starlinks, they're not keeping super far forward because they don't want those to be damaged.
Yeah, I don't. That's what I've heard. Yeah, Starlink has been a game changer for the Ukrainian military. It's been a tremendous asset. But yes, the front line, the units right on the front line don't appear to have access to it.
And then the cleanup question is, a couple people want to know what the requirements are to physically participate. So are you going to be at the happy hour at 5 where you can host a small cadre for that question?
Yeah, I already agreed to sign up Jeff. He's, I think he's flying back with me. Yeah, absolutely. And last thing I will say, I feel like a dirty used car salesman, but the QR codes will enable you to donate. And if you can't donate, again, now I'm sounding like a teenage kid, at least go to our YouTube, my YouTube channel and subscribe. When I used to hear, like, you know, these YouTubers, my kids watch saying that, I used to think, God, that's so tacky. It doesn't cost you anything. But my cyber, I guess you'd call it online marketing team, surprisingly enough, who are all Green Berets, I don't know, guys in their 40s, right, who figured all this out, TikTok and everything, because I keep getting people, of course, jump on saying, why are you using TikTok? I'm like, I don't. I've got these guys who do it, and it's from a remote location. I don't go near. They just post videos that we send them.
Which, by the way, your videos are just gold.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you the video, you had a video where you had no transportation.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So what happened?
Yeah, at a listed chance. Very quickly, yeah, we were, yeah, you just can't make this stuff up. I mean, say the Russians were literally closing on, they were closing this salient at the time. It was, and approaching the roads. And we had two vehicles get out and they both broke down just as we're getting there. And we've got a photograph of us push starting one of them. And the other we towed and managed to get it started that way. But it was just, what else can go wrong? It was, you know. So yeah, so if you happen to want to donate all-terrain SUVs, very, very welcome. If they happen to be armor plated, that's even better. It would be a dream.
Thanks very much,
Thanks
Colonel.
very much. Really appreciate it.